To anyone who thinks U.S. history has never been as crazy as it is right now, allow me to present to you the 1960s. Full of extreme cultural division, major political assassinations, rapidly advancing technology, and goofy television shows.
It's a low neighborhood, full of rum pots. They're used to curious sights, which they attribute to alcoholic delusions.
During all this, a crisis was unveiling in Southeastern Asia, Vietnam. Fueled by the geopolitical tensions of the Cold War, U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson figured that the United States should intervene in the civil war occurring in Vietnam in order to help contain the spread of communism. This leads to American involvement that proved to be a long, bloody guerrilla war that the U.S. was poorly equipped for, and ended in defeat for American arms for the first time in history. Back home, a dramatic cultural and political movement was taking place, the Civil Rights Movement. For African Americans who found themselves serving in the Vietnam War, their service proved to be a special test of patriotism. As showcased in the book Bloods, Black Veterans of the Vietnam War, author Wallace Terry puts together 20 personal accounts of African American veterans who served during the Vietnam War to share their experiences and the experience of African Americans during the war and after they returned home. As author Wallace Terry wrote in his introduction, the loyalty of the Black Vietnam War veterans stood a greater test on the battlefield than did the loyalty of any other American soldier in Vietnam. His patriotism begs a special salute at home. To begin to understand the reason why author Wallace Terry compiled this book, we have to look at his own background. Wallace Terry was an African-American journalist. Born in New York City and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana, Terry got into journalism while he was in high school and gained national attention in 1957 when he interviewed the pro-segregation governor of Arkansas, Orville Faubus, and a photograph of this interview hit the front page of the New York Times. Later, Terry became the editor-in-chief of the student newspaper of Brown University, becoming the first African-American to run an Ivy League newspaper. Terry then traveled to Vietnam in 1967 to serve 2 years as deputy bureau chief of Time magazine in Saigon and flew on combat missions and joined assault troops. Terry sharing his purpose for writing this book and the introduction he wrote. As Terry writes, "When my youngest child, David, was still a baby, I learned about the death of the youngest American soldier who would die in combat in Vietnam. The soldier was a 16-year-old black Marine from a poor and broken family in Brooklyn. He had lied about his age to join the Marines and thereby earn money to help support his mother. I vowed then that one day I would see between the covers of the book the story of the sacrifice of such young black men and others in the rice paddies of Vietnam. 10,000 miles from the heartbreak of American poverty and discrimination and injustice. This is that book. And now, as I write these words, that youngest child of mine is himself 16. This leads me into what I believe is Wallace Terry's thesis statement for his book. The quote from his introduction that I mentioned earlier, "The loyalty of the Black Vietnam War veteran stood a greater test on the battleground that did the loyalty of any other American soldier in Vietnam." Using the 20 personal accounts from his book, I will now provide a few examples to prove this thesis. My first example I would like to take from the 7th personal account in this book, Specialist 4, Hayward T. Kirkland. Kirkland served in the United States Army in Vietnam from May 1967 to April 1968. Haunted by a vision he had as a 12-year-old, it showed him he would serve in a war. So when Kirkland was drafted on November 22nd, 1966, he didn't even try to fight it. Arriving in Vietnam on May 15th, 1967, Kirkland immediately saw through the politics. When Kirkland returned back stateside, he was ordered to Fort Carson, Colorado to finish his last 6 months in the Army. Still dealing with the horrors of the war in his head, his peers ridiculed him for going to the war and didn't appreciate his sacrifice. Kirkland eventually began questioning his loyalty. Kirkland eventually claimed his physical and mental health was rapidly declining and hoped for an honorable discharge, which he eventually received. Kirkland's test of loyalty he received from his peers as an African American who served in the war proved to be a tough one, as it made him lose loyalty, and in desperation, Kirkland turned towards a life of crime. Next, I would like to take a look at the 8th personal account in this book and how it helps prove Wallace Terry's thesis. First Lieutenant Archie Joe Biggers. Serving in the United States Marine Corps in Vietnam from March 1968 to April 1969, First Lieutenant Biggers was faced with great taste of loyalty when he was met with extreme scrutiny almost immediately after returning home. Fellow African Americans, to quote Lieutenant Biggers, consider me as a part of the establishment since he was an officer. Even while visiting a colored school where he thought he would feel at home, everyone poked fun at him, calling him names. They did not respect what he went through or accomplished, even to the point where people would ask him what he was trying to prove when they saw his Purple Heart medal. To prove his great test of loyalty, Lieutenant Biggers ended his account with this quote, "I felt bad. I felt cold. I felt like I was completely out of it." For my final example, I would like to look at the 10th personal account of this book. Captain Norman Alexander McDaniel of the United States Air Force. Serving in Thailand and flying reconnaissance aircraft over northern Vietnam, Captain McDaniel was shot down on July 20th, 1966, and was held in a North Vietnamese prisoner of war camp until February 12th, 1973. That's 6 years, 6 months, and 23 days. Tortured, beaten, and starved, Captain McDaniel faced a different test of loyalty than the other two examples. Demanding military information out of him, Captain McDaniel refused, only giving his name, his rank, his service number, and his date of birth as answers every time. Due to the lack of cooperation, this resulted in torture, but Captain McDaniel refused to budge. The North Vietnamese, educated in the United States' troubled history of race relations, decided to use that as a tactic to make Captain McDaniel break. Using the news of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., they wanted to make Captain Daniel turn his back on the United States and say something critical on record. Captain McDaniel stood firm and proved his loyalty as a true American patriot. As Captain McDaniel writes, quote, "We deal with our problems within our own country. Some people just do not live up to the great ideals our country stands for. And some blacks don't take advantage of the privileges and opportunities we have. Although black people are kind of behind the power curtain, we have just as much claim to this country as any white man. America is the black man's best hope." That powerful message from Captain McDaniel brings reminiscence of the speeches from President Kennedy and Reagan of America being a city on a hill. So I'll close with this. We must remain a shining city on a hill to the world, a shining beacon of hope in the sky to inspire liberty to all. We did not build that city, but we must do our best to make it sparkle. This is the last stand on earth. Overall, I found this book extremely educational and a very good read that focuses light on issues that many people don't think about. These brave men were faced with extreme scrutiny during and after the war, and I feel like this book does an excellent job at raising awareness to this so people understand how it was truly a special test of patriotism for these African American soldiers. I believe author Wallace Terry does an excellent job introducing his point and his motives behind writing this book, and I believe that he does an excellent job in putting these personal accounts together and really allowing these men to speak their truth and speak their story. That is all that I have for my book analysis on Blood's Black Veterans of the Vietnam War by author Wallace Terry. I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.